Streets of Rage 2, many would say that it is one of the greatest games ever made, and I simply would have to agree. Being a sequel off of the highly popular original game in the series that released in 1991, the sequel expanded way beyond what was possible, with a better graphics engine, better sound effects, animations. Just the level of detail here is quite exquisite. That really pushed the boundaries and the capabilities of Sega's 16-bit console to a point that, even by today's standards, the game is stunning, and it's one of the best looking games, most visually stunning games ever seen on that system. The story of the game takes place 1 year directly after the original, with Mr. X back for revenge while trying to take over the city once again. But in a ploy to try and lure all of the heroes from the original game into a trap, he kidnaps one of the main game's protagonists, Adam, which leaves Axel and Blaze to once again travel on a journey to try and save their friend and put Mr. X out of action once and for all. But this time, however, they wouldn't be alone, because they would be accompanied by Adam's younger brother Skate and Axel's friend Max, a wrestler. So together they must battle all of the unknown threats that lie in wait. They will see you witnessing some of the best level design and even boss battles ever seen in a video game during that period. Even by today's standards, Streets of Rage 2 is often considered to be the greatest game in the entire series, and I would highly think so. It is often considered even as one of the greatest games ever made, and even with regards to its soundtracks, like if you ever hear people talking about a video game soundtrack, Streets of Rage 2 is guaranteed to come up in the conversation without question. The main composer that even worked on the original game, Yuzo Koshiro, returned to do the music in this one, and let's just put it this way, the first one was excellent, this one just blows everything out of the water. And the crazy thing about it is that this game, both its music and its design, is so good. It has never been bettered, and this game is over 30 years old now. That'll tell you how crazy this game is. Don't get me wrong, Streets of Rage 3 was a fairly decent game, but it definitely lost its appeal, and plus the music in it for some reason just wasn't as good. Even the more recent Streets of Rage 4, now I have to say, that is an excellent game. A really good game. And the fact is it was developed by fans alongside of elements within Sega. At least you can see where they got the inspiration from, and they've done a really good job of it. And the fact is you can play and find some of the hidden levels that are remnants of some of the past levels of all these previous games as well only adds to that that appeal. So much in a way that even the fan-made Streets of Rage remake that we've seen on the internet over the last 15 or so years is heavily inspired by Streets of Rage 2, even down to the whole graphical appeal. Yeah, it's a very cool series, I have to say. And while I do love my video games, and I've played hundreds if not thousands of video games over my time, but I would put Streets of Rage 2 easily down in my top 10, heck, even in my top 5 games of all time. Because it would kind of put you in mind, like, even though it's on a different kind of concept, if you look at the likes of Capcom's Resident Evil that came out in 1996, while that broke new grounds and nobody expected it to be as popular as it was, but then you seen how good Resident Evil 2 was, it just completely knocked everything out of the park. The same concept happened with Streets of Rage, especially with the first 2 games. The first one came out as more or less a direct rival to Final Fight in the arcades and on the Super Nintendo, and it was brilliant. But nobody expected the second game here to be as good as it was. It exceeded all expectations, beyond recognition, to a point that the game stayed on top of the video game charts for months. And even by today's standards, it is still seen as the go-to game or the pinnacle of the beat 'em up genre, even to say that it's the greatest beat 'em up ever made, because this was the game that set the standard, that still sets the standard even today. And even when you go back to listening to the soundtrack is just incredible. Like, and the thing is, even though it's considered old by today's standards, it still doesn't feel out of place. If anything, it still feels modern even in today's current age. Like, we're in 2025 now of recording this video. The game released in 1992. Like, it's crazy how good the soundtrack still is. I kid you not. Between this and more so the first game, but even more so Streets of Rage 2, I still go back to play this regularly, and I listen to the soundtrack very, very often. Pretty much every couple of weeks. It's just so good. I just love the beats, especially the original few tracks from the first few levels. They're just so iconic, they're so addictive. They really are timeless classics. There's nothing really about this game that I don't like. I love every aspect of it. The level of detail, the music, the effects, how things can gradually ramp up, slow down, and then you get to certain points where the music just gets that high tempo that it really gets you pumped to just literally kick the crap out of everything. Plus, you'll also get the crap beat out of you as well if you're not watching what you're doing. But even with that as well too, one of the best aspects with the game, like its predecessor and like all the games in the series, is its multiplayer aspect. This time around, having 4 characters, yes, there's more variety to choose from. There's different move sets and they're all unique to their own play styles. If anything, there's something there to suit everybody. But even with the addition of the co-op, you also have a dual mode, so you could have like 1v1 fights as well. So that also added something different to the appeal. But even from looking at articles online over the history of the game, the development took a lot of inspiration even from Street Fighter 2 because of the fighting mechanics and all of those gameplay elements, which really worked because we all seen how good Street Fighter 2 was. So when you incorporate those elements into a beat 'em up, like, you have an appetite for, well, quite simply a masterpiece. And it shows, because even years later, like many of Sega's extremely popular games, Streets of Rage 2 is probably one of the most ported games ever in history. It's gotten ports on so many different consoles, I kid you not, even up till more recent times. Like, the game received widespread acclaim upon its release. Magazines were raving about it. Gamers were just couldn't wait to get their fill of it. There was nothing better than being able to rent the game out at the weekend, and if you had a second controller, you could just sit down and play all evening or all weekend with your mates and just kick the crap out of everything that moved. It was epic. And even with me having 4 younger brothers, and even some of our mates that would come over at the weekends, now we didn't have a Mega Drive really as much growing up, we had a Master System, but getting to play the game was just, yeah, that was it. You could guarantee Streets of Rage 2 was always a game that would be in the catalogue of games that we would always end up playing. Like, even one of my mates, we used to go down to him during the summer months, I remember back in 1995, and this was around the time when the Mortal Kombat movie had released in cinemas and everybody was raving about it, even us. But I do remember vividly going down to my mate's house, and he'd gotten a loan of a load of games over the summer, and he had Mortal Kombat 2, but he also had gotten a loan of Streets of Rage 2, and I remember playing Mortal Kombat 2 a lot. But as soon as I was finished with that, you were jumping straight onto Streets of Rage 2, or if not, you were playing Streets of Rage 2 before you play anything else. And if I was to pick between the two, I'd pick Streets of Rage 2 easily. Don't get me wrong, I love Mortal Kombat, but Streets of Rage 2 for me is top notch, and like I said, I put it down in one of my favourite games ever. It has to. It has everything that you want from a video game. Not only is it the best in its category, it's also one of the best sequels ever in a video game series. Plus, it also has, quite simply, one of the greatest soundtracks, if not the greatest soundtrack I've ever heard in a video game. I know that might be a tall order, but it's definitely up there with the best of them, that's for sure. There's so many great things about this game, and that's why it's so highly regarded today. You ask anybody that's into video games, anyone that knows anything about this series has guaranteed to have played this game at some point, and they all rave about it. Everybody loves it, and it's easy to see why. Each of the characters themselves have their own quirks, their own graphical style. The movesets are just mad, but they're so cool, they're devastating. And let's just put it this way, even if you've had like a crappy day at work or whatever, there was always something good about just coming home and playing the game and just literally playing a couple of rounds or playing in a few levels and just punching the hell out of a few people, and you feel so much better. But I think it's the soundtrack that definitely does wonders with this. It just really gets you in a good mood. Yeah, it's such a good game. I can't fault it. Everywhere you look, there's always something positive to say about the game, and quite rightly so. While its later sequel, well, yes, it is a good game, and if anything, it did evolve in a lot of ways over this, but it just didn't capture that same appeal. It just didn't have that same thunder that this game had. But I wouldn't disregard it just on its fallbacks. It's still worth playing, but if you wanted a definitive version, especially during the Mega Drive era, Streets of Rage 2 is it. Yeah, I would definitely agree with the reviews and quite simply see it as one of the greatest games possibly ever made, because very few games ever stand out and even stood the test of time as much as this game has, so that'll tell you. In saying that, the game did get subsequent ports on the lesser powered systems with the 8-bit consoles, with both the Master System and the Game Gear, and to be fair, they were okay titles, but they definitely weren't as good as what was presented here. There are a lot of differences though between the 8-bit versions. If you look at the Game Gear compared to the Master System, even graphically they're slightly different, but the level layouts and some of the levels in question are totally different to what's even in the Mega Drive version. In some cases there's not as many levels in the 8-bit versions, but they're all mismatched all around. Like there's some levels that would have been from the Mega Drive version that are also in the Game Gear, but then they're missing from the Master System, and then there's kind of that same element between different versions as well. Although I will admit, even on the easier difficulties, out of all the games that I have played, out of the 3 versions, the Master System version, which I personally owned, I remember buying it when I was about 12. I remember getting it in one of my local toy stores, which was very, very rare to find a copy of the game for the Master System, and I remember holding on to it for years, but I did end up selling my Master System and all the games way back when I was moving houses back about 15-16 years ago, and I wish I kept the game, because when you see the price it's going for now, it's astronomical. It's ridiculous how much the game's going for now. It's one of the most expensive games ever for the Master System if you look on second-hand markets or on eBay. But money aside, it was still worth having in your collection. But it was the toughest out of all of the 3 games as well. The one thing I hated about the Master System one was the enemies were relentless, and there was, I don't know whether it was an inherent glitch, but enemies would often try to bombard you into a corner, and they just kept spamming the same moves. So even if you had a full health bar and they got you into a corner, you were gone. You were never getting out of the corner. You never had enough time to jump or to punch or even to use a special ability to get yourself out of a rut. They just kept wiping the floor with you until you lost your life, so then you'd have to wait until you respawned to have a chance to go at them again. And that was, I think, the game's Achilles heel, because you'd even find that happening on the easiest difficulties. There was certain parts of the game were ridiculous, but I found the Game Gear version to be a little bit easier, funnily enough, even though there was certain elements that felt the same, but it was a different game. But still, the definitive version is the Mega Drive version. Hell, it's still the best version of the game today. Like when you see it even on other platforms, just the sound itself, I know while it does emulate quite well, but you just can't beat playing the original game on the original hardware, in fairness. Yeah, one of the best games of all time, and I'll keep saying that because it is. It definitely set the standard for everything else that was to come after it, but it is still yet to be bettered. While games have come close, it's still the master of its craft, and it's easy to see why.